Hey, everybody. Welcome to Building Brand Gravity. My name is Anne Green. I'm a principal and managing director here at G&S Business Communications and soon to be CEO here at the agency. And I am very excited to be curating a conversation with the wonderful Kyle Turner, who is our digital growth director. Kyle, welcome.
Hello, hello. Glad to be here.
Hello, hello. So, Kyle, we're here to talk about the year in generative AI. It has been a year.
It
And I would
has.
say it feels like 100 years since the moniker ChatGPT first exploded into our consciousness just last November 2020. Now, kudos to those who already knew all about it long before. I know you're out there, but for most of society, it was last November. And it's kind of amazing to live through a moment when a new tech utterly captures all aspects of our imagination and really simultaneously shifts conversations everywhere in business world, tech world, academia, and also like your mom is asking you about it. So, Kyle, I'm sure you're having lots of conversations with family members too. And as we close out 2023, and the reason we wanted to talk today is the big question for me is, as a longtime integrated marketing communications practitioner and a counselor and an organizational leader, where are we now? And then where is this going and how fast? So I would venture to guess that there's about 16 million podcasts of this kind looking at Gen AI at the end of the year. And Kyle and I do not have the energy nor the time to recap every advance that's happened in generative AI in
No.
2023. But I think our goal today is to take one another's temperature on where AI is now, the big advances, run down how our industry, integrated marketing communications and all of its forms, has started to learn and adapt and incorporate, and talk a little bit about what we see, what's coming for the year ahead, including, I think, Kyle, you said what is BS and what is not BS. So
Oh,
does that
I'm,
sound
I'm
good to you,
excited to
Kyle?
get into that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So just to start it off, Kyle, first question for you. What's one of the big technological advances in Gen AI from 2023 that really made you stop in your tracks or get interested?
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot in this space as I'm sure you have. To me, what stopped me in my tracks, I saw earlier this year. I was talking with one of our colleagues here. A an AI model was used to spot pancreatic cancer in high risk individuals up to 3 years before a diagnosis. Now, this follows a similar story I saw maybe about 4 years ago of an AI model being used to spot brain cancer using blood samples. So, what does that say? To me, it's we're at the precipice of, I think, some really interesting and life changing, and in some ways probably life affirming ways that I think AI can start to change the way that we do medicine. This kind of predictive stuff, which we'll probably get into later a few times, is where I find the most excitement. I think as a cancer survivor, especially, you could make the argument that despite the research and the dollars that have been poured into the cancer space, we're only now, maybe the last like 4 or 5 years, starting to see some real sea change in the way that cancer is treated, diagnosed. And I think AI represents just yet another way that we can get to diagnoses faster and hopefully give more people a chance to live a life that they want.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that because having had former clients working in the cancer space like Memorial Sloan Kettering, there was so much talk about IBM Watson in the early days and
Oh,
maybe
I remember. Yeah.
overhype of what its capabilities would be in the cancer space. And when it didn't immediately deliver on the dream that, we saw out there was almost like this huge skepticism to say, oh, look, it's overhyped, it doesn't work. Meanwhile, I think the truer thing was those are some of the early tests and learnings, very early, of AI in that space. Obviously, IBM has Watson X now. They're very advanced in this area. But it is interesting to see now, and you and I have been around long enough, I certainly have, to see a lot of tech cycles. There's stuff that in the early blushes is not going to fully make it, and people kind of say, but then it's cooking along the whole way. So I think that's an exciting one. I mean, I think for me, the thing that blew me away this year is not maybe any one advance, it's just the speed of it all. and how listening to even deep experts who've been in the development realm of AI for many years talk about how much exponentially faster this is coming now than they had seen before. And also, just it is, as I said earlier, really wild to be both a human being and a professional around and awake and alert and mindful when the lightning bolt hits. And everybody says, I don't know what to make of this, but it feels so different and powerful. So I think that's a really, really, really big one. You know, in terms of, so we've talked about sort of the big picture, like what's that thing that really stopped us in our tracks? But there's a lot of milestones and breakthroughs happening that have started to certainly affect our industry. I'll start on that one. For me, it's watching AI be baked in everywhere. Very, very quickly, we went from the large language models, and OpenAI made a very deliberate decision to release that to the public. And it's actually really interesting to see the coverage behind the scenes after that whole insanity. That's kind of getting more into how the soup was made there and why OpenAI decided to release ChatGPT when it did. But we knew very early on that it needed to be baked into enterprise products that we're already using. And the speed with which that's happening has been really, really striking me. What has struck you on some of the front in terms of actual milestones and things being released this year?
You know, I when you said that the speed is striking you, I wanted to ask why you were surprised about that.
Yeah.
And I only asked because of this.
Yeah.
I remember reading long ago when I used to work in media planning and buying. I saw a chart, I'm sure you've seen it too, that
Yeah.
shows the speed at which different technological advancements hit 1 million users. I think by the time you get to Facebook, that happened in like a week, starting with like radio, which took, 5, 10 years. Moore's law, isn't it? Is it Moore's law that dictates like
Yeah.
change accelerates with change? I think I've been on this boat, and for so long, I've been waiting for to see the practical uses of generative AI, and I guess that's what's exciting me the most. You could say striking too. I am starting to be a lot more interested, or a lot less interested. I'll start there with the projections of what Gen AI could be, and way more interested with the like practical day to day uses of it now. I've told you this. The more that I use platforms like Dolly or GPT-4 or Claude or whatever it is, the more creative ways I think of using it. And I think that also speaks to the ways that Gen AI is changing right now. To your point about the speed, I think since especially since like somebody like Sam Altman has been kind of empowered by the staff at OpenAI, I only think that just going to continue to accelerate at this point, and we're going to have to get smarter, much faster about the ways in which we protect our ethics when using this stuff, because uh, I think the practical uses are going to expand just as exponentially as the technology itself is.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think you're right to ask me that question. I'm like, why should I be surprised at how fast things develop? The curve, like if I think about one of the last seismic shifts, which was really the right to web, the
Yeah,
meaning WordPress, TypePad, I don't need to code, the web is open to me, Web
WordPress,
one,
yes,
yeah, and then social media. That arc of adoption of process change, of societal change happened at a certain speed. This one's coming even faster. I think something you just said, Kyle and I had a session internally yesterday here at GNS with many, many of our colleagues just to talk about the state of Gen AI, what we're seeing, what it's baked into now, what our roadmap is, et cetera. But we had a lot of fun with prompts in the chat, prompts for the
hmm
human beings, not for the AI. And we are asking folks to share some of the uses they do at work or at home. And you're right, Kyle, like the diversity and creativity, and in some cases, the total randomness, but you're like, seriously, you thought to do that? That's so
yeah,
random, but it's so smart that
yeah.
I was kind of stunned. And it was funny in the chat to see other of our colleagues being like, whoa, I never thought of all these things. So that to me, I think something came to my mind. It's like you light a sparkler, at 4th of July, and all these sparks start to fly off of it. That's what it felt like watching the chat, like all this creativity and energy, um, that just seems to feed on itself. And maybe that sounds a little bit like the experience you're having.
Oh, for sure. I think it like kind of crystallized for me. I started using it a while ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, to help me draft. And this is it's wild to even admit this, but I asked it to help me draft a conversation with my 5 year old because our zones are changing here. So his school that he's in now is not going to be a school he will be able to attend without, some alternate, some extenuating circumstances next year. So I asked ChatGPT, GPT-4 specifically, like, give me the draft of a conversation that explains to a 5 year old why he has to change schools in a year from a school he doesn't like or that he likes a lot. And I thought that the way that this thing framed up a conversation like this was fascinating to me. Like, not something I would have thought of doing 6 months ago.
Interesting.
However, and this is why I'm being specific about citing GPT-4. GPT-4 is the more advanced version of
Hmm.
the OpenAI's GPT. So it is a little smarter, a lot smarter, honestly, about picking up on cues and understanding prompts than 3.5 was. It was fascinating. I thought that the way that it framed this up, obviously from the perspective of the parent, it framed it up as a situation on a playground. I, these are ways in which I had not thought of using it, but helping you navigate real human interactions, not replacing them, but kind of giving you a way to frame your mind around potentially difficult conversations. I think sounds maybe dystopic in some ways, but to me, it is almost therapeutic. It gives you a way to kind of get your thoughts out, help you organize them, and then perhaps come up with a more productive way of having a conversation that perhaps may have been harder to have previously. Kind of
That's
primes
such
you
a
for that.
That's such a fascinating example. And see, that's just another thing of like, wow, just see, experiment, see what it does. It reminds me, in the discussion with our colleagues yesterday, a big theme came out, which is helping you think about things in a fresh way or maybe coming at it from a different corner. And if you look at DeepMind and their experiments with AlphaGo, which built on what IBM did with chess earlier, you had this question of could a machine ever beat the elite Go players around the world, and everybody knows the story now. It did because it tried a move that just was so atypical, that a player that was decades and generations of human knowledge, that wasn't the way a master would play the game. And it's that reminds me of that's like it's taking a conversation that you as a parent would usually approach in like a set variety of ways and bringing it into a totally different context. To bring it into our industry, the Marcom industry, I feel like in talking to many agencies and many colleagues and many client side folks over the course of the year, because it's such a topic. I mean, all of us are talking about it all the time. How are you using it? What are you doing? The real theme right now of this year is experimentation to implementation. And I use implementation loosely because it's not as fully realized in many ways as it will be. I mean, that's obvious right now, but people are trying to put the rubber on the road in terms of how are we going to use this. So if you look back at 2023, Kyle, what are some of the early implementations you've been seeing in our industry or context that have been interesting to you?
Well, I think we're still at the nascent stages of what's possible in PR and comms for Gen AI. I see the most readily applicable ways to use Gen AI is would be in data and analytics. I think the more that you are leveraging data to make decisions, the more help you will likely need to interpret that data, especially now as we are getting access to more and more information. Um, the one of the ways that we are, or that certainly that I am trying to leverage Gen AI is to help with social media analysis, is to help with sentiment analysis. I think most of these tools are a lot smarter than tools like NetBase were, and they were using early versions of AI to kind of help, or machine learning to kind of help understand how sentiment is coming through in people's commentary on social media. we're in a much smarter place now. And though we may be still at the early stages of what's possible in data generally in PR and comms, I do think that Gen AI gives us an opportunity to catch up to other industries like marketing's been and media buying have been playing around with data for decades basically. And so now I think I can see a situation where maybe we throw in a few examples, a few articles that highlight a client's crises from let's say a 5-year period, and then use an AI model to help kind of predict what crises may come up based on a PR, an article, an advancement, a newsworthy item that our clients talk to us about, so that we can start to understand a little bit better how the past maybe influences our future actions. And I think you can use that same exact philosophy for content creation as well. Like I'm just understanding um, what you should be able to reasonably predict about a person's reaction to a piece of content just based on how they've reacted to other pieces of content before. I mean, I think obviously we're still very early on in that, but to the points that we were making earlier, the more that we start to use this stuff, the more creatively we think of using it. And I think this is just one of those ways. The data side of this, I think, is what really, really excites me. And I think that's where a lot of smart organizations are starting to leverage it now.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think back over the course of my career, and it's always been exciting to watch the convergence of major trends and themes. Early in my career, I got to watch the early advent of mobile phone working in wireless, and then the early advent of the transformation of the financial services industry into online. And then some of the really interesting technologies that were in the physical world, like contactless, like tapping to get into the subway. One of the earliest examples of that was in Singapore, in the Singapore metro system. And then suddenly you had this all come together into the mobile phone. You needed iPhone, you needed the financial services industry to come to a certain point. You needed certain other technologies like RFID and others, but when you converge together, suddenly you have mobile wallet and tap to pay and Apple Pay and et cetera, et cetera. Right now, what you just said, we are at a convergence point of all the discussion that's been had about big data. Remember when that was the term, big
Big
data?
data. It
And
takes me
then
back.
there, exactly, big lakes and pools of data
Hmm.
that everybody was talking about as if that was the answer. No, that is actually the problem. I have this
Hmm.
data, what do I do to derive
What do you do
value?
with that? Yeah.
Then we heard about machine learning, how will that help us? And then we hear about predictive analysis. Well, predictive, that sounds exciting, how does that work? Now we're seeing the convergence of all of this, and clearly there are many professionals and industries that have been deeper into this, as you said, that have already been unlocking this. But I think now it's the proliferation of it across enterprises and even into the consumer realm that's so exciting. And yeah, I agree with you. That's going to unlock value in ways for our clients and for ourselves that we've only thought about in the past and hoped for.
As a leader of a company with 100, 150, 200 plus people, how do you realistically think about implementation of some of these, using some of these use cases as examples? I mean, because you sit in a place where you're kind of getting a 30,000 foot view of the goings on in the operations of GNS, but you've also got to think of like practical on the ground implementation too. So where do you find the threads that allow you to anchor some of this more conceptual thought into like real tangible action?
As an organizational leader, but also a practitioner, I'm still an active counselor and media and presentation trainer and practitioner. I feel it's incumbent upon us to think at multiple levels at one time. We need to think 100,000 foot, as in, what does this mean to society? How will this change how we live? What does this mean to be human? What does it mean about authorship? How do we understand the ethical dimensions of how humans will interact with this unbelievably powerful technology? And can an agency like ours survive into the future? That sounds dystopic, but I mean that very seriously. What will our business look like? What will our services look like? How do we bring the best of ourselves, augmented by technology, to be the best partners and counselors? So that's a 100,000 foot level. But then you're right. I have to zoom down onto the ground to say, how do we actually operationalize this? And some of the things you and I are involved in, Kyle, with our Gen AI team here, it's going to be very much about the big picture, but then also, what are the use cases? How do we separate them into pillars? What are the pilot tests? How are people already using it? What are the ethical guidelines we need to put around this based on my work with the PR Council? And how do we both experiment and support business model? So, I don't know if you have any reactions to that, but I think it requires all of us to be very elastic and flexible in our thinking. Go big and then zoom in.
I do. I mean, we're about to get into a conversation about the industry adapting to some of these changes, and I don't want to spend too much time navel gazing. However, I do think that kind of pursuant to the title of this podcast, I think the brand gravity around our agency and probably about or around a lot of legacy agencies will probably need to shift. And probably, it's worth it to think of the ways in which we maybe need to adjust how we brand ourselves. I think everything you're talking about um, makes total sense. And, having dedicated people here that you've picked to be at the forefront of this experimentation and having and give them like actual tangible tasks is paramount here. But I even think the way that we talk about this agency as we start to blend some of this technology into our day to day, I think that's really going to be what's necessary for most organizations, really ourselves included. As we start to change and adapt to some of these new techs and new ways of doing things.
Yeah, and part of it will be I'm not doing the same thing that I did 30 years ago
Yeah,
when I came into integrated marketing communications at a very large agency, Burson Marsteller. And of course, yes, my role is different. I'm not entry level now, but nobody, and this is the funny example, but there's a billion of these. Nobody is cutting out press clips and measuring column inches and pasting them onto a piece of paper. That sounds absurd now, but the reason I say that is jobs changed, agency capabilities changed, client needs changed, client organizations changed. And sometimes that change is fast and really painful and disruptive. Other times it's such a slow arc that suddenly you wake up and say, my God, how much our lives have changed. I think if we can pivot into what we expect to come in the next year or so and what, very practically, but also bigger picture, I think that what I'm going to be watching, both as a practitioner, as a colleague, and as a client counselor and as a leader, is where is the change going to be fast and where is it will be a more steady organic arc where, hey, it's just getting baked in. Oh, we're unfolding capabilities. Oh, we can work faster versus, wow, we really need to shift what people are doing. Like we need to make that decision tomorrow or today.
yeah,
We need this tool, this platform. And I think you're right, Kyle. It takes a lot of intentional thought about, and also what is it that client organizations will need. One of the most fascinating things I've watched over the years is which capabilities live where and who feels they need them. Who is it that brought web development in house, agency or client side? And then when was it farmed out again to partners who are specialized? How many people are on internally on a social media team? How many are doing content internally at a client? Where are they using an agency for that? Where do we begin and end? There's a million answers to that question. But I think part of it for us is also understanding where the human begins and ends, where the machine begins and ends.
yeah. Conversation that came up in the town hall we were doing yesterday. Listen, I think most people when you talk to them about this, I think will probably have a somewhat fearful reaction at worst, and a cautious one at best. I think there's probably merit to a blend of those two sentiments, honestly. However, I'll say this: the fact that we and other agencies like us are starting to explore and sign on pilots and partnerships, I think that shows some of that thinking is being shed. Caution is justified to an extent. I think no one really knows what the next 5, 10 years are going to look like when it comes to jobs, especially in the comms industry. I've seen a couple of studies. I will not try to cite them here; just Google them. But I've
There's
seen
a
a
lot
couple
of
of
them.
studies. Yeah, I could see a couple of studies that talk about the industries most that are probably going to be most affected by generative AI's preponderance. Um, PR, comms, marketing, writing, like all that stuff. I mean, it's near the top of the list in all of them. Not surprising. I think all that just means, though, is that the ways in which we think about how to use this stuff and these advancements, I think you have to your point, move both with caution and with intention. But you also have to be curious enough. And I love the phrase curiosity. I think curiosity is one of the more redeeming characteristics anyone can have. You got to be curious enough to actually try some of the stuff for yourself. And to my point earlier, identify the ways in which you're using it that could spark more esoteric ways of using generative AI. And then use that as a guide to maybe on a larger scale what you can implement and what actually maybe you need to take more time to do.
Yeah, part of what I'd love to spark in myself and others is the joy of this exploration and experimentation, while being really clear-eyed about cautions and concerns, and also possible very difficult futures if we as a society and as human beings
Yeah.
don't stay attentive to that. I think we are at our best in this field counselors, thought partners, innovators. We are called on because we're not in the day to day, every day with each of our client organizations, their talent, and they're situated in the business that they're in. We stand at a crossroads of many industries, and that's supposed to be our goal and our role. And we can never lose sight of that. And it's not a defensive posture at all. It's actually a really celebratory one, because it does celebrate curiosity and intellectual rigor and being open and cross pollination in multiple industries. And what are we learning? But we have to remember that our value is to bring that spark back to those who are contracting with us, spending their, valuable capital to bring us in as partners. So if I look ahead to the future, let's both think for a minute about what are we most excited about over the next like 1, 2, 3 years. I'm pretty excited about AI everywhere. I'm very excited about it being baked in all kinds. I mean, there's such an explosion of development and creativity on the technology front, especially as these platforms open source or allow folks to, create off of them. And also as the larger entities allow enterprises to sort of create their own large language models and predictive models, et cetera. So that's exciting. So that mass integration. And I'm also really excited in the next year about really leaning into the places that we can make ourselves more efficient and creative, where things were a little bit rote before. It's always hard. You get the most amazing, talented young people who come in and you're like, hey, there's this stuff that you have to do that is a little bit rote. But if we can make that more strategic and fun and interesting and faster and smarter, that they can then add value to places where that human instinct is there. I think that's amazing. I mean, what are some of the things that you're excited about?
I mean, you heard me talk about this at the beginning of the podcast, and it's been this way for a while, but I really think that the biggest and most interesting advancements are probably going to be in medicine.
Yeah.
I want,
I
I
hope that's
want,
the case, Kyle. I really do. I mean,
I,
that's
man,
an amazing opportunity.
I think the diagnostic abilities of AI are probably its strongest suit. Its ability to digest, find connections, build on, identify trends that are probably often missed by humans. I think that creates so much potential for being able to find diseases, being able to diagnose people early, and to my point earlier, give them a better chance of living. I think the less kind of, I guess, like life changing uh, examples that I can cite. I love the ability to create images. I think the creative space is obviously hand wringing a little bit because of this, and for good reason. You know, a lot of what the writers and directors and the actors have been fighting over is about ownership of IP and how things like generative AI models are being fed. However, I see it as a potential for expanded imagination. I recently used Dolly to give me an idea for a tattoo. And I'm not expecting to walk into a tattoo parlor with this exact thing. In fact, Dolly has a weird thing where if you I gave it my son's name, but it kept misspelling it weirdly. It would add letters, remove letters. It was combine
It's
letters.
keeping us on our toes. It's making sure that we don't understand what the hell is going on.
Yes, exactly. But I had that idea of my son's name emerging from the water for years, and really couldn't properly articulate how it should look. But this gives me at least a starting point that I can talk to an artist about to actually make it something real, something tangible, something emotive for me. And I think that's where a lot of, I think, smart creators are using it just as an inspiration engine. Like, oh, let me just spit this idea out and see what it comes back with. And then maybe I can take that and tweak it and change it just because I now have a physical representation of something I was just thinking of,
I
you
think
know?
that's really powerful. Our creative team, and even folks beyond our formal creative team who are exercising their own creativity, we have people at GNS who do so many different things. But
Yeah.
our creative team is really leaning into this and understanding its edges and boundaries and pushing those edges and blank page brainstorming, and also, you know, the enterprise piece, the baked in piece. When platforms like Adobe bake some of this capability right into the tools we're already using, that just is a game changer, right? So,
Hmm.
simple things like, hey, there's a photograph with two people and I need only one of them, and I'm going to have AI erase them and fix the background in seconds, what used to take some careful work over maybe an hour or so to really get it right. That is the kind of removal of friction and speed that then allows each individual here, each professional, to bring even more of themselves to what we do. And that to me is really, really exciting. I think that brings me to the places as a counselor where we need to exercise thoughtfulness, caution,
Yeah.
advice. I used to work with ASCAP years ago, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, and I was very involved with digital copyright issues in the early days of Creative Commons and post Napster. And, this world now is supercharged some of the issues like the rights of creators, the, the proliferation in digital of IP, ownership, payment. I think we as agency people need to keep intellectual property law, protection of creators, protection of people's images, and also authentic representations of things. Deep fakes, misinformation is definitely a concern to me. I think you'd be completely Pollyanna and blind not to be concerned about, as you said, what are the choices that individual people or groups are going to make on how to use technology that is this powerful. So as we come into an election year, um, as we try to advise our clients and ourselves on what the proper use is, I want to make sure that we're looking at this through an ethical lens and that we never lose in our excitement, that we also never lose the other side of the coin, which is what's a responsible and intentional use of this technology. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I when I think about policy, it is always a really, really nuanced thought for me, only because
Yeah.
whenever you write a new policy, especially for a policy for something that nobody understands 100% and that is constantly changing, I think we're probably still dealing with some of this with social media, honestly. Um,
Yes, we
it,
are.
I mean, it requires a certain level of understanding, and I think when I think about, I know we'll get into the future a little bit, but when I think about the future, I think about the ways in which people are going to try to regulate AI and whether or not the regulations are going to do more harm than good as far as our ability to understand how best to use it with intention. I- Like, and I don't know that, like, I'm making some wild assumptions here, obviously, but I do think that there's enough evidence in the ways that policy has been written for social media that you run the risk of not including like nuanced thought into how we leverage AI if you kind of are not just quick to advance it, but also quick to overregulated. I don't want to sound like a deregulation maven here, but I'm just bullish on advancement, and I think that the more you have people, or a more diverse array of people who are willing to experiment with it, much like I said about more creative ways to use it, I think you come up with more creative and more nuanced ways to manage how to ethically use it. I don't think any policy can stay stagnant. I think even ours at GNS, which is a good one, I think, will probably need to change next year as this technology becomes more ubiquitous and it changes itself. And we're going to have to find different ways to think about what experimentation looks like and get more comfortable with how things that we maybe have felt comfortable doing as humans can either become either obsolete or heavily augmented. Our humanity can be augmented using some of the creativity that this might unlock for people.
I think you're very right. The way I would phrase it is that regulation in this space is likely to lag. That's why it's incumbent upon us as counselors to our clients and experts in our field to create both the environment for experimentation, pushing, opening up, transforming how we work, but also understanding what we think are the proper guide rails and what we feel is an ethical lens on the application of generative AI.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very, very important. What's your advice for marcoms and PR professionals to stay ahead and just we cover the whole integrated marketing communications landscape. So, what are you most hoping that even our own colleagues do in the future?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think experimentation is key. I think getting access to and using the most um, advanced versions, the advanced models. I think a lot of people still use GPT 3.5, and that is kind of their baseline of knowledge for what AI kind of is. And when you actually look at GPT-4, even Claude to an extent, and some of the other platforms that exist that are coming online now, it's way more advanced. It's way smarter. It's way easier to kind of get at some useful responses. I've even started using GPT-4 as like a de facto replacement for Google. Right now, if you write your prompts the right way, you can get a detailed answer on anything. Um, and way more detailed than what you would get from Google, because Google's just a collection, like a list of websites, as opposed to an articulation, an explanation of why something is with citations, which is what you would get from ChatGPT. So I would just encourage people in the Marcoms industry to experiment with it, not just in prompt writing, not just in research, but in the ways that you can more readily um, show off tone and voice. You can ask AI to help you identify what the thesis of a press release, of a blog post, of a white paper is, to make sure that your ideas are actually coalescing into something useful. And I think that just some of the things that I was talking about earlier with crisis prediction, I think I just thought of this, like, one way that I could conceivably think of using AI right now is to take an article about a crisis and maybe start playing with your prompts to see if there was a way this crisis could have been predicted. Like, what ways could a crisis like this be prevented? And then maybe start building content off of those ideas. I mean, but that only comes with experimentation, right?
Yeah,
Like, I think
I
you have
think you're
to just
right.
start playing with it.
Yeah, and my advice to colleagues in our industry and really beyond, experimentation, but then also really lean into what we are talented at in this industry, which is critical and discerning thinking. What is the source? Can we go back and verify something? In a world where AI is still suffering from hallucinations, and it will get better over time, how do we ask ourselves, how do I know this is right? What do I think about this? And also, really lean into the collaboration. You talked about augmented humanity. I love hearing people talk about what that could be in the future. And I think it goes in a lot of different directions, including in the physical world. But how do you take your skill as a writer who can iterate on different drafts, who don't, you don't make as a human being, the first thing you write isn't the final draft. Usually you're going to iterate and you're going to learn something, and what you intended to write may not be what the final product ends up being. So how do you use AI and the machine, for lack of a better word, to help you iterate and use and lean into and open up more space for what makes us truly human? um, so to finish off today, because this conversation, as we said, could go on forever at this point on these topics. There's a lot of prognosticating out there, Kyle. There's a lot of people who have a lot of things to say, and I guess we're two
Wow.
of them as well. So I think we should call what is the prognostication that's BS and what is not BS. I think that's a good way to end. So
I think so too. I think
I'll
so too.
start with one thing that I think is a little bit of BS, which is what I'm calling the utopic dystopic binary, meaning it's either all awesome or it's all the Matrix and it's all iRobot and they're going to destroy humanity, right? So, my feeling about people who have prognosticated about our industry over the years, as in the press release is dead, all agencies are going down, there's never going to be any stockbrokers again. I've heard too many of these over the years. What I usually find is that the binary is the zero sum thinking is BS. The truth is usually in the middle. And usually what will happen is we will bring the best and worst of ourselves to it.
That's right. I mean, you're spot on. I don't think you can go too extreme in either direction,
Yeah.
because that leaves you way open to missing a lot of really interesting, nuanced things. So I agree with you. Total BS. What's BS for me is, and I think you've heard a lot of people say this, the fear of human obsolescence by AI. Now, do I think that there is some very obvious negative outcomes that are possible with generative AI gone unchecked? Of course, I'd be foolish not to. However, my thinking is, and this has been repeated ad nauseum by a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am, the most likely scenario is that people who don't use AI are going to be replaced, just like with any new technology. The people who learn it, who adapt to it, who integrate it into their day to day experience, often accelerate either professionally, socially, whatever have you, at a much faster rate than those who don't. Not to say that it's possible, but I certainly don't believe that human obsolescence is on the horizon. What I do think is that the world that we know, the world that we're comfortable with now, that's probably gone forever. But it will just give rise to a new comfort, a new normal, which we should all be familiar with after COVID. Honestly,
I think that's a really, yeah, it's true. We're having to go through a lot of change and embracing it and
yeah,
being open to it. So, final advice: learn, self-educate, experiment, and we're going to keep going on that. I know here, and hopefully, I just love learning. So for me, it's an exciting time to be leading an organization, but also still doing the tasks that we love to do. So, Kyle, thank you. And we really appreciate those who tuned in. This is Building Brand Gravity, and we will see you back for our next set of episodes in 2024.